the scramble to salvage the Iran nuclear deal. French President Emmanuel Macron is in Washington for a state visit, as Iran insists the West has no right to make any changes to the agreement. So, can Macron convince Trump to stick with the deal? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Jane Dutton. France and the United States have a long history that goes back centuries. From the American Revolutionary War to the Statue of Liberty, the two countries have had strong ties. French President Emmanuel Macron is hoping to build on that special bond during his three-day state visit to Washington, D.C. And Donald Trump has rolled out the red carpet. But beyond the handshakes, smiles and lavish ceremonies, there are serious policy disagreements, including the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which could threaten to put a strain on the special relationship. Trump says he wants to withdraw from the agreement, while France and other European nations are urging him to stick with the deal. Iran, for its part, says if the US withdraws, it too will likely abandon the agreement. We'll get to our guests in a moment, but first, Al Jazeera's Kimberly Halkett reports from Washington, D.C.
U.S. President Donald Trump welcomed French President Emmanuel Macron to the White House with a state dinner to celebrate the bond between the two nations. What appears to be a warm friendship was on full display. Earlier in the day, Trump even, somewhat oddly, decided to wipe dandruff off Macron's shoulder.
We have to make him perfect. He is perfect.
But as the pair embarked on the substance of their bilateral meeting, Trump had a stern warning for Iran.
They restart their nuclear program, they will have bigger problems than they have ever had before.
His statement underscores the leaders' key foreign policy differences. Trump favors withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal. As one of the signatories to it, Macron wants to preserve the 2015 agreement to limit Tehran's nuclear powers. Before a May deadline on whether to pull the U.S. out or not, Trump wants his concerns addressed. Those include a plan to stop Iran's ballistic missile testing and limit Iran's influence in Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, and Syria. Macron agreed they may need to address those issues to keep the deal alive.
On Iran, we disagree on the JCPOA, but I believe we can come up with something that can deal with the fundamental issue of the JCPOA, which is the nuclear issue, but also deal with these other three issues that aren't included.
Trump again suggested Gulf nations need to make a larger financial investment in Syria's future stability and security following the defeat of ISIL.
The countries that are there, that you all know very well, are immensely wealthy. They're going to have to pay for this.
But the meeting appeared to do little to ease fears of a looming trade war. With no sign, Trump had agreed to exempt the European Union from tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, set to take effect on May 1st.
We have a very first issue on trade, which is overcapacities in steel and aluminum. It doesn't come from Europe, and not even from France.
Kimberly Halkett, Al Jazeera, at the White House.
With the US and France trying to resolve their differences, there is no disagreement over Iran's next move. As we mentioned earlier, its foreign minister says his country will likely abandon the deal if the US pulls out. And he had some sharp words for Donald Trump.
We've said that the United States has not lived up to its side of the bargain. That is, to its commitments to lift certain sanctions, not to impede economic relations between Iran and its economic partners. It has done all of that. It has prevented, basically dissuaded, threatened companies from engaging with Iran. So the economic benefits of the nuclear deal have not been at the level that had been promised.
Let's bring in our guests. In Tehran, Hamid Mousavi, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the Tehran University. In Washington, D.C., Hilary Mann Leverett, a former State Department diplomat who negotiated with Iran. And Lubbock, Texas, joining us on Skype, Oliver McGee is an author and does public policy advocacy in support of the Trump administration. A very warm welcome to all of you. Hamid Mousavi, I'm just wondering how Iran is viewing this vacillating over its future and the future of the deal. What are they going to say about it?
Well, yes, I think a lot of Iranians are very disappointed in Macron because previous to his visit to Washington, the position of the European Union, especially France and Germany, was that the nuclear deal has to stay in place. Nevertheless, what we have heard during this visit to Washington is perhaps a very closening, a convergence, if you like, of positions regarding the nuclear deal, with Macron saying that we need a new nuclear deal. The problem with that is we already have a nuclear deal that actually took over 2 years of diplomacy. And if the United States is not fulfilling its obligations in the current deal, why should Iran trust the United States in making a new deal? So I think a lot of skepticism and a lot of disappointment regarding France in Iran right now.
Oliver McGee, that's a good point, isn't it? I mean, why should Iran now trust the U.S. with anything as far as this deal is concerned?
Well, what we see right now is the Trump administration is adopting what the Reagan administration did on nuclear containment, and that is trust but verify. So I think the sticking point that is right now is how can the United States verify that it's achieving its interest inside the deal? And more importantly, how can it verify that all the pieces of the puzzle are being adhered to? So right now—
And are we clear what those interests are, what the U.S. interests are at the moment, as far as this deal is concerned?
Yeah, those interests really are about America first. It's about trying to make sure that they can control nuclear proliferation, not only in the Middle East, but also in the Asian bloc as well. And that's what you see right now in the talks with North Korea. And those are going very parallel to restarting the Iran deal. You might think that the Trump administration is trying to unite the interests that is received and inherited from the Obama administration to be more consistent with the America First national security strategy that Trump has articulated already, and then get that to match what they're trying to achieve in the North Korea piece as well. You already see the North Korean leader conceding to the interest of the West. And now what you're seeing this week is the French are already there, and the Germans are
conceding possibly until he gets Trump around the table. Excuse me, jumping in here. Hillary Mann Leverett, I mean, yes. I know we're jumping ahead here, but North Korea, he's probably looking at this with glee and thinking, why should I stick to any deal if the U.S. is going to change its mind at any time?
Well, very interestingly, within the Trump White House, there is a certain consensus that pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal will help them in negotiations with North Korea, because their goal, they say, is complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which would mean taking apart every single piece of North Korea's nuclear program. And what stands in their way in terms of achieving that with North Korea, in their view, is this nuclear deal that the Obama administration negotiated with Iran that leaves Iran with a nuclear program where Iran is perfectly entitled and continues to enrich uranium on Iranian soil. So that's,
I mean, is that the fundamental behind what Donald Trump loathes about it so much? I mean, first and foremost, because it's got Obama's name, I suspect, but is that—
That's absolutely the first issue. I mean, the first issue, and this is critically important because it's really all about domestic politics and President Trump himself coming into midterm elections here in November 2018 and then for his re-election in 2020. So it's very much rooted in domestic politics. And a key pillar for Trump in his domestic politics is to distinguish himself from President Obama. And this was President Obama's signature foreign policy achievement. So first and foremost, Trump must do, in terms of how I think the White House views this, must do whatever he can to tear down and minimize and belittle what Obama achieved. However, that does leave some room, and there is some optimism here in Washington this morning that does leave some room for a follow-on agreement to the JCPOA, to the Iran nuclear deal, something that makes it much bigger, in President Trump's words, that would give him a victory out of the jaws of Obama's defeat.
Okay, Oliver, what is this possible new deal going to be? And do you agree with Hillary there that there could be a deal on the side, that he's not going to scupper or pull out of this agreement?
I think that Trump is staying very consistent to what he's been saying on this issue for quite a long time, that it's time for America to get tough. We've already shown that we're getting very tough with North Korea, and they're coming to the table. And now he's saying at the same time, going into office, that this Iran deal stunk of high heaven. He did not like it. He's really saying that.
But everyone else liked it. Iran had, in their view, already come to the table.
Well, the thing is that what he's saying is he needs to change the economic interests of the United States associated with the Iran deal. And that's what he's also achieving in the North Korean negotiations as well. Because we can't have uranium going beyond 3 to 4% in the nuclear realm of where we are in Korea and also in Iran. We do not want them to get uranium values up to 90% where they can have a bomb. That's proliferation. That is against the economic interests of the United States. And what you see going on in the White House is a much stronger hawkish stance in Bolton, and combined with Larry Kudlow, where you're uniting national security strategy with economic security strategy, and this is the America First strategy. I don't see Donald Trump moving very far away from that on this. He's going to be tough, hard negotiations with Iran, tough, hard negotiations with North Korea, and then he's also working very carefully to keep the relationships with the French, and then later in the year, in November, he's planning to go over to make good relationships with our long-standing partner, the UK, and he's going to bring the Germans on board.
Okay, let me put this to Hamid. Excuse me. President Rouhani has already said today, actually, that he won't accept any changes to the deal. Do you think he'll stick with that line? Because we've heard on the same day Zarif saying that Iran is always open to diplomacy. So two different messages there.
Right. So before I answer your question regarding verification of the deal, the JCPOA is very clear in that the only party authorized to actually inspect and decide whether Iran is abiding by the deal is the IAEA. And the IAEA has consistently reported that Iran has fully obliged by the deal. So there is no talk whatsoever of cheating. Even in the United States, I don't think they believe that Iran is enriching over 4%. I mean, just a few weeks ago, Mike Pompeo, the head of the CIA, who's trying to become the new Secretary of State, told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that he doesn't believe Iran is after the bomb even before the deal, let alone after the deal. So regarding the issue of verification, I don't think there is any problem whatsoever there. Nevertheless, what the United States is asking right now has nothing to do with verification. The United States is talking about Iran's ballistic missile program, about Iran's regional policies. Well, the problem is that these issues have no place in the current deal. There's not a single word about Iran's missile program in the deal. Now, regarding what Iran will do, I do not think that a final decision has been made. I think Iran is still waiting to actually see what Donald Trump will do. And then after that, I think there are probably three likely scenarios from the Iranian perspective. Either that Iran continues with the deal, although it might decide to, not implement some aspects of the deal, so maybe somewhere in between. The second scenario would be to withdraw from the deal because the United States has withdrawn. And right now, actually, there's this talk of maybe even withdrawing from the NPT. So one of those three scenarios, but I think Iran has essentially no choice but to respond in a way if Donald Trump decides to withdraw from the deal.
Okay, Hillary, if Iran does decide to withdraw from the deal, what are we looking at?
Well, President Trump, gave his heightened rhetoric yesterday here in Washington that if Iran does withdraw from the deal and restart, in his terms, restarts its nuclear program, they would be facing dire consequences from the United States. But I think my two colleagues hit on two critically important points. First, my colleague in Tehran very rightly, very astutely pointed out that Secretary of State designate Pompeo testified before Congress here in Washington last week that the United States never believed that Iran was racing toward a bomb before the nuclear deal in 2015 and still doesn't believe that Iran would race toward the bomb. That's one piece. The other piece is my colleague in Texas pointed out really the lack of any economic payoff for the United States from this deal. Those are two critical aspects because from the perspective of people I speak to in the White House, on one hand, the United States got nothing from imposing these nuclear restrictions on Iran since Iran wasn't pursuing a bomb anyway. And it got nothing economically. The European companies are the ones that benefited, not American companies. So there's really no interest within the current White House to stick to a deal that, in their view, essentially only puffs up the former President Obama, but gives the United States nothing in return. That said, the key points that Trump has put out there as American concerns, and who knows whether these are real since the nuclear issue also now seems to have not been so dramatic in terms of Pompeo's testimony. But those issues, as my colleague in Tehran pointed out, the ballistic missile program, the Iran's not pursuing a nuclear weapon ever, and Iran's regional stance, its influence in the region, there's real room to pursue and proceed on those paths. And it's not that hard. And this is where I think members of the French delegation here in Washington see some optimism. On the ballistic missile program, it's not that hard for Iran and others in the region to agree on a limit for the range of missiles. Iran doesn't need, and has said it has no interest in intercontinental ballistic missiles, long-range missiles. It doesn't produce them. It can agree not to. On not having nuclear weapons forever, Iran is a signatory to the NPT. It can literally just recopy that language into a new agreement. The sticking point, which people are really minimizing in some ways, is how to deal with Iran's role in the region. Here in Washington, there's really no sense of how to deal with Iran's continued rising influence. It seems no matter what the United States does, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, Iran is the one that benefits. And so there's real puzzlement, I think, especially in the White House, how to deal with Iran's influence. And here, my colleague in Tehran perhaps could point to this more. Their foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, has an idea. He has an idea for a regional security mechanism to have a dialogue on all of these issues. I'm not sure that will work in Washington. People here aren't that big on dialogue. But to me, that's the real sticking point. And that's where I think President Macron has focused his plan going forward.
Okay, Hamid, do you think that's what this is all about at the moment? What is happening in Syria, in particular, the fact that Iran has got such a strong foothold here, the close relationship between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. administration?
Well, the issue here is that, first of all, if there is to be negotiations with Iran, the United States has to talk to Iran directly. Right now, the United States is talking about a new deal unilaterally. There's been no negotiations whatsoever with the Iranians on any of these issues. Even if there is negotiation, the only way to success, as Professor Leverett just pointed out, is to have a mechanism where other parties are also involved. For example, you cannot have Israel having over 200 nuclear weapons in the region, in fact, the only nuclear power in the region, and at the same time ask Iran not to even have conventional missiles. How is Iran supposed to defend itself? So if there is to be dialogue, it has to be on a regional level, and also other parties such as Russia, Turkey, even China should be involved. Right now, there is absolutely no dialogue except for Trump making decisions on his own.
Okay, Oliver, is the paranoia of what's happening in the Middle East, Iran's growing strength there, Israel's growing concerns about Iran coming ever closer to its border, is that what's driving Donald Trump now and his policy, whatever it is?
Absolutely, Jane. This is the art of the crust of what the matter is. there has been economic interest associated with the original deal called a $150 billion Boeing contract to build Emirates Airlines. So we're talking about big airplanes, big airline industries. That's an economic interest. But the biggest economic interest that Donald Trump's been talking about for years is get the oil, drop the price down on that oil and keep it down. They are looking at how American interests can get a hold of those reserves and start building the reserves of oil there. We have lots of reserves of oil here in the United States, but the Middle East is also a very strong economic interest for the United States in that oil. When you have good oil, then you have good 4% below unemployment, 4% unemployment, and then you're trying to drive an economy from 3.5% to 4%. And that's the economic security interest that Larry Kudlow is sharing with the president. And they needed to have a strong national security strategy, which they have in place, and also a hawk in there, like in John Bolton, to be able to unite national security with economic security. Because when you look at Donald Trump, it's about integrating immigration and integrating economic tax reform, economic interests and growth, jobs, jobs, jobs. And it's also about integrating America's infrastructure.
Hillary, considering the negative impact Donald Trump's reign has had on Iran and its European business partners, do you think the E3, Britain, France, and Germany, from a financial point of view, could go it alone?
I think Chancellor Merkel in Germany put that out on the table soon after President Trump's inauguration and her visit here to Washington. Her last visit here to Washington was terrible. President Trump would not even shake her hand. And I think she went back to the European Union and tried to make the case how the European Union could go it alone. They could be a single power on the world stage to compete with the United States. They didn't have to go along with the United States. But I think to her dismay in some ways, her colleagues in Europe, especially in France with the election of President Macron, he said, well, I'm not so interested for France to go it alone with the European Union. France may get a better deal going it alone with the United States. And so we've seen the French really out in front, working hand in hand with the United States. They were the first to come to President Trump's side to retaliate in Syria after the chemical weapons attack there a couple of weeks ago. President Macron has had weekly conversations with Trump, not just these visits for all their pomp and circumstance, but weekly conversations with President Trump. So I think what Trump's interest is when he looks at the European Union, and he has said this quite frankly, is he doesn't want to deal with the European Union. He doesn't want to deal with a strong multilateral framework on the other side of his negotiating table. He wants a one-on-one scenario where he's dealing with countries, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Japan or China or France. He wants to deal with them one-on-one because he thinks then the United States has the clear advantage as the world's biggest economy, maybe side by side with China. But he sees the United States having its economic and strategic advantage if it is sitting across the table from a single country. So for Trump, not just on the Iran deal, but on all sorts of economic issues, on tariffs, on trade, it's critically important for Trump to have this relationship with France, to break France away from Germany and the rest of the European Union.
Okay,
and
let's bring in, sorry, let me bring in Hamid, if I may.
Trump is, sure.
What about Iran and its relationship with the EU here from a business point of view? I know how much Iran needs the EU. And let's talk a little bit more about what Zarif threatened when he said that there would be consequences, and how would this play out on the ground if this deal is broken in any way?
Yes, well, first of all, when we talk about the economic interests of the United States in the region, I think it's actually very debatable if the United States wants to solve the conflicts in the Middle East, because the tensions of the past few years have actually helped the United States sell billions of dollars, in fact, over $300 billion of arms to Saudi Arabia, and now they're selling a lot of arms both to the Emiratis as well as the Qataris. So I think it's very debatable if they want to actually reduce the tensions in the region. Regarding the issue of Europe and Iran, I think if the United States decides to withdraw from the deal on May 12th, we'll have to see if they decide to exempt some European countries from sanctions or not. If, however, they decide that they want to implement secondary sanctions being sanctions that also punish not only US companies, but actually companies all over the world. So even if a Chinese company does business with Iran, according to secondary sanctions, they could get punished by the United States. And if on May 12th, the Trump administration decides to go down that path, then the problem is that Iran cannot even continue with the deal with the Europeans, even if it wants to. Because even today, a lot of
Hamid Mousavi, thank you very much for that. Those final words there, Hilary Mann-Leverett and Oliver McGee. Thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. Mine is @Jane Dutton. Goodbye and thanks for watching.